than I would. So, but I mean, I guess that the reason that we asked the question why these horror comics are so important, maybe we also need to ask what need do they fill. I mean, because if comic books aren't as terrifying as say a movie where you don't see what's coming, why do we keep going back to them? What need do they fill for not only the creator but the reader?
I think a lot of it has to do with the craft of comic art. You all know that there are certain artists that just trip your trigger. Just love to look at their pictures. And in the field of horror, Bernie Wrightson comes to mind. I look at anything he draws. Kelly Jones is another one. Kyle Holtz.
So, Carl.
I was going to say, I think the prevalence of horror comics is simply because you can do some stuff with a comic that you can never do with a film. Most of the time film is, I hate to say, like, done by committee. Like, all the producers, like, let's do this, let's do this, let's do this. Well, in a horror comic, or comics in general, you can do anything. A perfect example from a non-horror comic is, like, Watchmen. At the end of Watchmen, a big giant squid attacks the city. You can do that in comics, you can't do that in film. So I think you can go a little further. I mean, that's just comics in natural. You can go a little further with your story, or like over the top, and even more so with horror comics.
I would agree with that.
We're done.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thanks for coming.
Good question, Carl. Based on what you just said, how would you, in your own interpretation, say, like in film, you can build a suspense based on the music, the sounds, or the lack of sounds. How would you do the same in a comic?
You can do the same in a comic through pacing. I hate to go back to Scott McCloud. I mean, he did the Understanding Comics. That idea of playing with time, with the panels, you can do the same thing. You don't have the music and stuff like that, but you can do the same thing with pacing in a comic book.
I believe you can do some of that too with getting in close on a character, showing how they're reacting, and pulling you into
extreme close up. I was reading the other day that idea of Sergio Leone he was one of the first people as a director using like extreme close-ups just to get a reaction. And now it's commonplace, and in comics that's part of that language that you can use that. I mean, I use it all the time.
So, any other questions before we move on to another subject?
Romance comics.
Romance comics, yeah.
That's a horror.
That is a horror. So that's a horror. So, do you think that, I'm just curious, because Carl was talking about when you focus on, and I think you guys are talking about when you focus on a person's face, you convey their reaction, you show how they're feeling, you convey their emotion. Is that something that you're able to do maybe a little more intently than in film? Because in film, you're along for the ride, it kind of feels like. With comics, it feels like maybe it's a little more in-depth in terms of what you're investing in. And I mean, does that play a part in how you handle it?
I think so, because with a comic, you can stop. The film is going to go on at its own rate. You're either with it or you're going to walk out. But with a comic, if you hit a place that's chilling, or just speaks to you about the character's emotions, you're going to stop right there and soak it up and look at that picture for a while. And that's something you can't do with a movie.
It's something
you want to stop it.
I say, just as someone in the audience said, you can control the pace, but as Mike said in the beginning, you're kind of at the mercy of the artist. That artist has to be. I mean, you can sit down and write the most chilling scene that you can think of, but if the artist isn't able to like these guys here have more control over what happens. You know in your own head how it's going to look. But if I write a scene, like I have a scene in Army of Darkness where Ash is talking to the Necronomicon, and the Necronomicon is saying things to him that are kind of like hitting at him, like really poking at something very personal about him. I don't know how the artist is going to pull that off. He can make the scene look very cartoony, or he can make it look very atmospheric, hopefully as I described.
Tense.
Or tense. Right.
Tense and stuff like that. Like zoom in on his eyes if the Necronomicon says something like, you know, oh my god, you know.
Right.
Zoom in on the eyes and stuff like that. That's how I would handle it.
And color has a big impact on that too.
Or lack of color. Right? Like
Exactly.
lack of color. Most of my stuff is a monochrome grayscale. I used to give a feeling of the book.
Sure.
So again, there is a collaborative process to it. As a writer, as Mike said, you're kind of hamstrung to a certain point with what the artist does, unless you have the benefit of collaborating with an artist that you know is really capable of pulling off the scenes that you have, and you can put that in there and invest a lot of your time into writing that script and saying, this is what I want to happen. You can write the most tense. I have this happen all the time. You read scripts that you go, oh my god, this is the scariest script I've ever seen. But then when it's finally translated into a comic or even a film, you're like, wow, they really dropped the ball on that. And so it all depends on the technical ability of the folks who have to really put those images up there.
Right.
I'm just saying, repeating what you said. To make myself look smart. Yeah, Mike Barrett. But did I tell you I was sitting next to Mike Barrett?
You could do worse than repeat.
I have a confession to make. I'm not Mike Barron. I'm a Mike Barron impersonator.
You're good.
You know, my name is Sharky Green. I wish you'd said that before I went back to your hotel room. Oh!
It's going blue tonight.
That's right, yeah, we're playing blue. We should change the name of the panel again. So, okay, with all that being said, you have control of the pacing, the artist does. The writer has control of the plot.
The writer has control of the pacing.
Right, okay.
We like to think we do.
Until we screw it up.
So the artist screws it up.
Until you have an artist who's
It's a great story until the artist screws it up.
The artist blames the inker.
And everyone blames the editors.
Yeah.
That's why they get the big bucks.
So, I mean, okay, so harkening back to the 50s, let's say, back to shock suspense stories you were talking about, Mike, Tales from the Crypt, those types of things. Those kind of set a template for, I think, horror comics. And so, let's talk about a little bit about how horror has evolved from that time into now. What's kind of changed about horror back then? I mean, I love those horror stories from back then. I think they were great.
I think the EC stuff. I mean, there was I mean, they're great, but there was a degree of kind of tongue-in-cheek humor, camp almost to it. The eerie comics in the '60s, I think they more like sharpened the edge. I guess it became a little more. It's horror, suspense without that sort of comedic element.
Right.
I think audiences are harder to shock these days. I mean, we've come a long way.
You're all jaded. You're all jaded.
To me, one of the best horror comics I read was Night Force. DC did it a while back. Was Marv Wolfman and Gene Colan. I don't know if anyone here read it. It was him doing long form novels before there were trade paperbacks. Night Force would work great as a trade right now. I'm surprised they haven't collected that yet. But it was him trying to do the horror movie, and but you had to be invested in the characters because when you got to the end, when you saw what happened to them, you'd be like, oh my god, I can't believe he did that with them. Because inevitably, like Kirkman does now, all his characters didn't meet very good ends at the end of the story arc. So, but folks are harder to shock these days. You have to care about the characters to even have what happens to them affect you anymore. You know, if you can't get the people to care about the characters, then
Also, look what's going on with horror films. I mean, it's stopped being build up the tension, and it's more like, okay, I'm going to torture this person for 15 minutes, blood's going to spurt out, and at the end of the film, someone's going to get away and they're going to kill me. That's, you know, it's moved from horror to torture porn.
torture porn. Right?
Torture porn. Because you're all jaded.
It's your fault. It's your fault. We blame you. I'd write with artistic integrity if it wasn't for the audience. I really don't believe that. But quote me on that.
That's why we're filming everything. So. So today, what comics are doing it right? What comics are getting horror right?
Nobody's getting it
You
right.
don't
Right,
think
Mike?
so?
Well, I don't know, I think some of Steve Niles' stuff is very effective. I don't know where he is, he's supposed to be on his panel.
Steve Niles is a rock star. He has better things to do than hang out with a bunch of schlubs.
He's selling books.
He's selling books, yeah, really. You know, he's a sexy man, too. And you ever meet Steve Niles?
That's why he's selling so many books.
Yeah. Makes movies.
I've seen the guy.
Get some of the Corbin material from the old Skull anthologies from Last Gasp. That was scary stuff.
Yeah.
Corbin's always been good. I think Corbin today would still go over. And didn't he
Well, he
do
does Hellboy here and there. So.
Yeah, and did a couple of issues of Hellraiser.
Hellraiser?
Yeah. Back like 6-7 years ago.
Anyone like excited about the Hellraiser reboot, the Clive Barker stuff from Boom?
You know something, the first Hellraiser movie is so good, I don't know why they're rebooting it.
Money.
Money?
Agreed. Yeah.
But it is Barker doing it. I mean, it's not like they're somebody
Well,
else.
wait, are they rebooting film or are they just doing comics?
Oh, there's the new
There's
movie.
film work.
There's a film in the work? Yeah.
Carl, who do you think's doing it right now?
I was just thinking of that. I still like Mignola. I mean, it's kind of moved from horror into more like, I don't know, fantasy folktales with a dark edge, dark fantasy. Hate using that term, but I like it mostly for the art.
Doesn't scare you though.
It does not scare me in the least.
So
And I was thinking, like that original question, what comic scared me? Back in the day, I remember reading, and I didn't know who Steve Niles was back then, when he was doing an adaptation of I Am Legend, but you can make the argument it was a book rather than a comic. But I was reading a comic, and that scared the hell out of me. I do think there's a good argument to be made that like Walking Dead suspense is horror. Yeah.
Yeah, there are definite moments of just, oh my god, I can't believe they just did that. Things that were scary.
How do you think that changing that's kind of off topic, but changing the artists from the original artist of the first few issues of The Walking Dead to Cliff Rathburn, how did that affect your view on The Walking Dead?
For me, it didn't really. I still enjoyed it. It actually took me a while. Maybe I'm dense, going, wow, they got a new artist. You know. I thought the styles were pretty similar.
Yeah, pretty seamless.
Yeah.
I hated it. I don't read it anymore because of that. You can tell him I said that.
Quote me on.
Mike?
What? What
Yeah.
was the question?
Yeah.
The-
What was the question?
The artist change on Walking Dead.
Oh,
Any-
I read a number of issues and I was very impressed, but I haven't been following it.
Can I tell you what affected me more than the artist change of Walking Dead? When you guys went from Steve Root to Stefan Petrucca on Nexus. It took me a while. I couldn't accept that. It took me a while.
Oh, Stefan did a mini-series,
Yeah.
but it wasn't our idea.
Really? It wasn't your idea? You were still writing it?
They asked if I minded if Stefan did a 4-issue miniseries involving some of my characters, and I don't mind.
There was that whole run that you guys did on Nexus without Steve, though.
Yes, there was. It was.
And I hold you personally responsible for that.
Incidentally, if you don't know, Steve published a series of Nexuses that came out 2 years ago. It's brand new stuff, and we have it back at the Big Head Press table.
Have you guys made up?
Oh yeah.
Sure. Because you got it out. I mean, it was talk about horror comic.
Yeah.
When him and Steve Root fall, that's like Hall & Oates falling down.